Today I'm excited for this homily to focus with you a little bit on the early life of St. Anne. But before we do that, just one more thing I wanted to mention about visions, right? I mentioned some of the things that the church helps us to know which visions we should write off and which ones maybe are worth our time and energy. One of the other things to keep in mind too with visions is that it's not perfect, right? Even in these recordings of Catherine Emmerich's visions, it's funny reading them sometimes. I think this adds to their credibility, doesn't take away from it. But she'll say, like, I saw this, but I don't remember exactly what happened. Or someone said this and it was really, really important, but I forget. She has these moments where she doesn't remember everything perfectly, and when she's telling the writer who was recording her visions, and she was doing it out of obedience, right? When she was telling them the things that she saw, she was saying what she saw and what she heard, and often she was putting it then in her own words, right? Trying to describe what it was that she was seeing happening. So because of that, it's not perfect, and maybe that's okay, right? There may be little things that we might question or we might wonder, but we expect that with a vision because she's trying to relate something that she saw that was so amazing and so often not easy to put into words, not easy to break down and kind of just describe exactly. That being said, it's amazing the insights that she has and the things that she saw and the things that she relates to us. And it's such a big help in just getting a fuller picture for us of St. Anne in particular of who she was and what she was really like. And so today, the early life of St. Anne, what was the beginning like? And you remember I shared a few days ago about the vision that was given to the prophet when her grandmother went and asked about getting married, right? And it was at that time that he saw a rose bush with 3 branches. And on the second rose, there was like this marking of an M on it, right? And he said it was through that rose that the promise would be fulfilled. And then for St. Anne's grandmother, it was through her second child that St. Anne would be born. And she would be the one who would carry that mark of the M. That mark of the M, what does that M mean? I mean, we can guess, right? My guess is Mary, right? Because she's the woman of the promise, the woman through whom the Lord would come into the world, that the Word would be made flesh through her. Now getting to St. Anne, to her mother, and to St. Anne's birth. Anne's parents, they had their first child. Anne wasn't the oldest, she was the second oldest. They had their first child, and while they loved their first child, and that child was awesome, they were somewhat distressed because this child didn't bear that mark. There was no clear sign that this child was the one with the M that had been prophesied. And so after their first child, they were then barren for 18 years. They couldn't have any more children. And it was only after those 18 years praying that then they went to the prophet on Mount Horeb, who then told them to continue to pray and to offer sacrifice. Finally, after doing all of this, they did conceive. God blessed them. And now Anne's mom received this message. Sorry, I'm confused here. Are you confused? Yeah, I don't know if this is, I can't remember if this is St. Anne's mom or grandma. I have to look that up again, okay? I'm sorry, that's a little confusing. Anyway, the point is that it happened it happened twice, right? It happened twice. So I think to St. Anne's grandma, and then it bumped down, and now St. Anne's mom, this is the message that she was given just before Anne's birth. She said, I saw that Anne's mom was given a revelation at night. She saw an angel beside her bed writing a letter on the wall. It seemed to me that it was again that letter M. Anne's mom told her husband about it, and he also had seen it in his sleep. They're both seeing angels write this letter M, just like the prophet had told to Anne's grandmother. And then 3 months after this, Anne's mother gave birth to her, Anne, and she came into the world, Catherine Emmerich says, with the sign on her body. I don't know what exactly that means. Somehow with the sign of the M, some kind of sign indicating that she was the child of the promise, that she was carrying that M down through their generations. Very interesting, right? So St. Anne is carrying the M. St. Anne was born actually in Bethlehem, Catherine Emmerich says. And then after she was born with her family, they went to Sepphoris, which is near Nazareth, Jesus of Nazareth, right? Mary of Nazareth. They moved to Sepphoris near Nazareth. And this also was a big, I think it was like a mining place or quarry or something. It was a big like kind of working man or kind of place where lots of people went for work. But then also their family had a second place they acquired after a little while in Zebulun. If you hear that in the New Testament, Zebulun, or in the Old Testament, they had a place near there as well. And they moved there actually after the death of St. Anne's mom. She died even when she was quite young. And it was when they went to Zebulun that then this was where, she says, St. Anne's dad was able to make that connection with Joachim's family, who Joachim would then become her husband eventually one day. We know, and I've shared before, how St. Anne's family, it seems, was well off materially compared to other families. But don't let that throw you off, right? They weren't elitists. They weren't people who were lording their wealth over others or even holding on to it tightly. Their family was known for their generosity. As quickly as they received it, they gave it away. And it was St. Anne's parents who would instill in her this kind of rule or law of charity, this law that taught her that the best offerings, the first offerings, they go to the temple. The first and the best go to the temple. The second best go to the poor. And the third best, you can use the third best, what's left over. It's a good rule for life and for generosity and charity. And St. Anne learned that, and her and Joachim eventually, they would live that. I mentioned a little bit ago as well, but didn't go deeply enough, that part of the ancestry of St. Anne going back, her family line traces back to Moses and Aaron, but in particular to those who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, right? And that's very significant. There's more to it than just that, wow, that's cool. Like their family going back carried the Ark of the Covenant. What an honor, what an awesome thing. And so many of their prayers and their devotion and their habits for the faith, it came and stemmed from there and was passed down generation to generation. But there's also another amazing thing to look at, right? It was St. Anne's ancestors who carried the Ark of the Covenant. But then it's also, they kind of carried the Ark of the Covenant in that letter M, right? They carried the Ark of the New Covenant. Mary is called the Ark of the New Covenant. Why? Because just like the Ark was the seat of God on earth, right? The mercy seat was on the Ark. They believed that's where God in this world somehow, in some way, he resided there. That's where heaven and earth met. Now, that's the Ark of the Covenant. But now for St. Anne and looking towards that M, St. Anne then carries within her this lineage, this promise of a new Ark of the Covenant, a new place where God will reside, where heaven and earth will meet and they will connect. And that is in the womb of Mary. But before Mary, Mary is in the womb of St. Anne. She's like carrying the Ark of the Covenant inside of her. And then Mary would be the Ark of the New Covenant, having Jesus inside of her, God made flesh. An amazing insight whenever we think of the Ark of the Covenant, and we're envisioning St. Anne as a holder of the new Ark. Also then, just going back to the early life of St. Anne, Catherine Emmerich writes that in her 5th year, Anne was, like Our Lady, taken to the school in the temple, where she remained for 12 years. And so they had this option or this practice where the young girls could go and live in the temple, and they would receive training, instruction. I don't want to get into it too much of what they would do, because I'm going to get to that when we get to Mary and to her early years. But with St. Anne, she did that from age 5 and for the next 12 years until about age 17. She was in the temple, serving at the temple. And then after that, at age 17, as was common, she then kind of graduated out of that. It was her time to leave, and she went back to her home. And there, as was common, the younger ladies would then, it was common for them that they would get married then after that. I want to leave you just near the end with one really good quote of what she sees from St. Anne's mother just before she dies. So as St. Anne comes back home, it's then that her mother falls ill and dies. But she leaves a message with her first. She records, "A year after Anne came home, her mom fell mortally ill. And as she lay dying, she spoke to all her relations and presented Anna to them as the future mistress of the house. Then she spoke once more with Anna alone this time, telling her that she was a chosen vessel of grace and that she must marry and must seek counsel from the prophet at Mount Horeb. And then she died." And so for her mom, she wanted to pass on and instill in St. Anne that she was carrying that M, and that it would be through her that the mother of the Lord would enter into this world. And St. Anne, of course, then goes to the prophet, and we'll hear more of that as we go on, and ends up marrying Joachim, opening the door to Our Lady. For us, maybe something to think about as we're just kind of getting this bigger picture of the early years of St. Anne is how God works, right? How God is always working in the good and in the bad, and he's looking to accomplish his purpose. That even if things go wrong, that God can still use that for his glory, right? He can still bring the ship back on course. He can still straighten things out. That throughout all of this, we look at all of Anne's history, it's all leading towards the birth of Mary, the birth of Jesus. Her line has been carrying this M for generations and generations, and it wasn't lost. It wasn't lost by human weakness or failure, but that our Lord was able to work through all of this to get to this point of the birth of Mary. What about for our lives, right? If we think also in our own lives, that God has been working and is working to complete his purposes. In the midst of all the great things we're doing, in the midst of our failures as well, trying to bring us back so that his will can be accomplished, his glorious will, which is the best thing that could ever happen to us or to our world. St. Anne, we ask for your prayers. You believed in God, you trusted in him, and you saw unfold before your eyes his work, his hands, his purpose. We ask that you would help us to see that as well, to see it in all the good things that happen. Often that's easier, but even especially in the harder things where we can't easily make it out. It's not easy to see the hand of God, but that we can see him working, maneuvering, inserting his grace, and doing great things. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.